honor and privilege to present the draft estimates of revenues and expenditure of the Tobago House of Assembly for the 2023 fiscal year, in keeping with Section 41 of the Tobago House of Assembly Act 40 of 1996. It is indeed a momentous occasion for the brand new Progressive Democratic Patriots administration, as well as for Tobago and the rest of the country, as it is not only our first budget, but this is the first time in 21 years that Tobago is receiving policy directives from a new dispensation. Interestingly, we are only the third political party since the installation of Act 40 of 1996 to present a budget in this chamber. The draft estimates, Madam Presiding Officer, are presented against the backdrop of worldwide gloom and anxiety. Of course, these are caused by three major disruptive global events: the COVID-19 pandemic, the Russian-Ukraine war resulting from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and climate change. These events threaten the stability and indeed the very existence of many countries across the globe. Madam Presiding Officer, it is evident, even from a cursory glance at the current global developments, that the world has entered another of its dangerous periods. Economic recession, growing unemployment, growing world food shortage, high inflation, and a resurgence of the tension associated with the Cold War era are the most obvious manifestations of this period of danger. We therefore cannot proceed on the basis of complacency or in the folkloric mamagism that God is somehow a national of this country who has conferred immunity upon us from the dangers that have already struck, as well as from those developing to strike. Your new PDP administration of Tobago will face the threats with courage, alertness, and planning, as well as with the most progressive agenda ever seen anywhere in this country after genuine collaboration with the people of this island. Madam Presiding Officer, at this point, I want to highlight the significance of today's event. No single document expresses a nation's political and policy priorities more fully than does the annual budget. The budget allocates expenditures to the hundreds of government programs, projects, and identifies the revenues, taxes, non-tax funds, and borrowed funds to pay for these expenditures. More importantly, it expressly presents key policy mandates of a government for the next fiscal year. Accordingly, our budget will present the key policy mandates for the Tobago Island government for the next fiscal year. It is of critical importance to note here, Madam Presiding Officer, that the current constitutional arrangements that established the Twin Island Republic of Trinidad and Tobago have limited, if not denied outright, entitlement of the Tobago government since this colonial arranged marriage to the political and policy powers of the budget due to uncertainties associated with the revenues to be allocated to Tobago by the central government. For instance, Madam Presiding Officer, in May 15, 2022, mid-year budget review, the Minister of Finance increased the national budget by $3.082 billion, but only allocated $60 million or 1.95% to the THA. This does not look like an oversight, but rather a deliberate contradiction to the recommendation of the Dispute Resolution Committee, which was accepted and approved by Parliament in 2000. But whether oversight or deliberate omission, it is a breach of the law which stipulates that the THA should be awarded between 4.03% and 6.9% of the national budget. And Madam Presiding Officer, I want here to put the nation on notice that this disregard will not be allowed to continue any longer. New Tobago dispensation, new rules of engagement. Right. Madam Presiding Officer, the budgetary proposals which follow were influenced primarily by a series of stakeholder consultations, submissions from the divisions of the Tobago House of Assembly, ideas from an online platform, a series of virtual consultations, and the PDP mandate. Madam Presiding Officer, in the presentation that follows, I shall endeavor to discuss the fundamental issues, the challenges, and opportunities for development, which, defined in its broadest sense, encompasses not only production and productivity, but the entire socio-economic, constitutional, and institutional ecology of Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, for the remainder of the presentation, I will proceed as follows. First, I will provide an outlook of the international, regional, and domestic economies. Second, I will identify and discuss policy reactions and actions that must be urgently taken to save lives and livelihoods. Third, I will articulate the long-term socio-economic development framework and the policy agenda for fiscal 2023. Fourth, I will present the budget numbers and the financing options. And finally, I'll provide a conclusion, whenever that is. Madam Presiding Officer, I wish, as I did before, to alert this House and listening audience that today's presentation is less parsimonious than I intended. However, I thought it necessary and important to take the required time to carefully set out the vision, policy agenda, and programs of my administration. Notwithstanding the length, I assure you that the presentation will be dynamic and groundbreaking, as PDP always. I now examine the outlook for global, regional economies, and then outlook for the national and Tobago economies. Global outlook. Madam Presiding Officer, Tobago's development efforts face significant headwinds emanating from an international economy that is in turmoil. Projections for global growth are now very much dampened by the effects of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In fact, the most recent projections of both the IMF and the World Bank are about 3.6% in both 2022 and 2023, assuming no further escalation in the Russian-Ukraine conflict or expansion of economic sanctions. According to the IMF, other major economies, the USA, is now projected to grow by 3.7% in 2022, while Canada is projected to grow at 3.9%. Both economies are expected to contract in 2023 as monetary policy tightens to suppress inflation. In the euro area, growth is forecasted at 2.8% on average in 2022 and even lower in 2023. In the United Kingdom, forecasted growth for 2022 is 3.7%, but is expected to fall drastically to 1.2% in 2023. In Asia, China is forecasted to grow at 4.4% in 2022, despite some localized lockdowns in Shanghai and Beijing, but to rise to 5.1% in 2023. India is forecasted to grow to a high of 8.2% in 2022, but will fall to 6.9% in 2023. Madam Presiding Officer, according to the Economy Forecast Agency, the West Texas Intermediate price of oil is forecasted to rise slightly to about $114 US per barrel by December 2022, but is expected to rise even further in 2023. The Henry Hub price of natural gas is expected to rise to $11.35 US per MBTU by the end of 2022 and should fluctuate between $10 and $12.50 per barrel US in 2023. Overall, this trend is likely to dampen demand for whatever Tobago seeks to export in 2023 and beyond. Associated with this will be growing inflationary pressures. Increases in the cost of fuel and food linked to both the pandemic and the Russian-Ukraine war will lead to higher inflation expectations, and greater demand for wage increases. The major implication is the need for wise investments to grow Tobago's competitive capacity in the face of these challenges, starting in fiscal 2023, if possible. Regional economic outlook. Madam Presiding Officer, a good development strategy for Tobago will target production of goods and services that can be exported to markets of the Caribbean region. So they too must be screened for headwinds and enablers. Economic activity in Latin America and the Caribbean was poised for recovery to pre-pandemic levels, but now faces increasing uncertainties owing to developments at the global level. Real gross domestic product in this region is expected to grow much less than the world average, in the amount of 2.5% for the next 2 years. However, within the Caribbean itself, growth rates are projected to be much higher, at 10.5% and 9.1% in 2022 and 2023, respectively. The challenge within the region is great when consideration is given to the mitigation and adaptation measures required because of climate change and the decarbonization agenda. Every year, weather-related disasters create huge disruptions to production and financial losses within the region, driving down demand for the types of services Tobago can export. The tourism-dependent economies in the Caribbean have started to reopen from pandemic-induced business closures, and as a consequence, there will be some uptick in economic activity. The International Air Transport Association expects overall air travel numbers to rise by 4.0 billion by 2024, slightly exceeding pre-COVID-19 levels. Within the Caribbean region in particular, the figure should be about 82 to 92% of the 2019 numbers between 2023 and 2024. Cruise travel is also expected to rebound after facing disruptions during COVID-19 pandemic. Guyana, our friends in the south, is poised for the largest growth within the region, driven by activity in the petroleum industry. With the lifting of economic sanctions by the USA on Venezuela, the crisis in that country should be greatly reduced, reversing the trend of outward migration and kickstarting their economy. This is a consequence of the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the need to guarantee oil supplies, given that Venezuela possesses one of the largest reserves of oil in the world. The data suggests mixed prospects from growth and development stimulus in the regional economies, again signaling the need for thoughtful investment in fiscal 2023 to boost Tobago's capacity to win markets for its export outputs. The national economic outlook. The outlook for the national economy is of importance to the budget strategy of Tobago, because the Trinidad economy is the source of much of the transfer on which Tobago relies, and much of the inflation the island imports. In this regard, the outlook for the national economy is also mixed. Like other petroleum exporters, Trinidad and Tobago enjoyed relatively high energy prices in 2021-2022, which will continue until fiscal 2023. On the other hand, the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, in its latest economic bulletin, reported overall reduction in energy sector production in the third quarter of 2021. There was a decline in the natural gas production with the closure of Atlantic Train 1 and the maintenance closure of Atlantic Train 2. Mining and quarrying activity also declined. However, there were strong increases in crude oil production as well as in increased petrochemical output, the latter driven largely by the growth in methanol and ammonia production. And for the third quarter of 2021, the non-energy sector also experienced mixed fortunes, with increased activity in the transportation and storage, finance and insurance, and the manufacturing sectors. That, notwithstanding, the manufacturing sector still had about 38% excess capacity, with most of the growth in manufacturing concentrated in food, beverage, and tobacco subsectors. The country's gross official reserves at the end of April 2022 stood at US $6.7 billion, representing about 8 months of import cover. Conditions in the foreign exchange market were quite tight over 2021 in spite of the improvements in energy reserves. Although business activity has slowly restarted, lingering effects of the pandemic are still evident within the labor market. The Central Statistical Office recorded a 6.5% unemployment rate in the first quarter of 2021 as compared to 4.2% 1 year before. In March 2022, the rates of headline and food price inflation nationally were 4.1% and 7.9% respectively, and the core inflation was recorded at 3.2%. In spite of rising global interest rates, the central bank starting in March has kept the repo rate at 3.5% to facilitate the domestic recovery, since inflation rates are still relatively low. Overall, there has been little or no progress with respect to the diversification of the economy in Trinidad away from the energy sector. This points to the continuing need for budget policy in Tobago to be designed to stimulate meaningful development in order to lead the diversification of national exports while creating significant productivity growth to create buffers against imported inflation and to generate foreign exchange. And that brings me to the Tobago economic outlook. Madam Presiding Officer, I now turn my attention to the Tobago economy. The most recent data provided by the Economic Management Research Unit in the Division of Finance, Trade and Economy indicate that Tobago's GDP at constant prices fell by 7% in 2020 relative to 2019 and rose by approximately 4% to an estimated $1.7 billion in 2021 relative to 2020. The positive improvement in 2021 has been largely attributed to the gradual reopening of the island's economy in 2021, as well as increased government spending. Madam Presiding Officer, it's worth noting here, in the last decade, between 2011 and 2021, there were 7 years of declines in GDP to the point where the island's constant price GDP in 2021 was equivalent to that of 2011. This means that the economic pie did not increase. However, modest GDP growth is expected in 2022 and 2023. The data also indicates that the state sector was the largest contributor to Tobago's GDP in 2021, accounting for approximately 48% of the island's GDP. The second largest contributor was the finance, insurance, real estate, and business services sector, accounting for about 28%. The tourism sector was the third largest sector, accounting for about 10%, only 10% of GDP in 2021. Finally, the data suggests that agriculture and manufacturing sectors were relatively small, collectively contributing about 2% to Tobago's GDP in 2021, with agriculture contribution amounting to a mere $18.7 million. Now, read accurately, Tobago's GDP data speak loudly to continued underperformance of the Tobago economy and the urgent need for budgetary allocations to focus heavily on productivity growth, income generation, and the development of competitive export capacity. Thank God PDP win this election. Madam Presiding Officer, shifting my attention to the labor market conditions in Tobago, I wish to note that the entity charged with the legal responsibility to produce labor market data for the country, the Central Statistical Office, continues to produce these data with significant lags. The latest labor market data for the country and for Tobago are only available up to the first quarter of 2021. You see why we need our own statistical office? This situation is untenable and must be addressed frontally in the shortest possible time. Madam Presiding Officer, we cannot plan effectively without current and reliable data. And Madam Presiding Officer, the most recent labor market data suggests that unemployment in Tobago for the first quarter of 2021 was approximately 3%, a figure which is significantly below the national figure of 7%. The share of the labor force employed in the government sector stood about 54%, with the private sector employing about 46%. Comparatively, the share of the national labor force in the government sector stood at 28%, with the private sector employing about 72%. Madam Presiding Officer, the share of the island's labor force with tertiary education as the highest level of attainment stood at 17%. The share with secondary education as the highest level of attainment was recorded as 55%, and the share with primary education as the highest level of attainment was about 28%. The levels of education and skills point to an economy with weak capacity to adjust in a self-reliant way to the competitive challenges of economic development in the national and global market process. Madam Presiding Officer, I now turn my attention to prices and inflation. The data above point to an economy that is virtually defenseless in the face of the threat of inflation imported from the rest of the nation and the world. The most recent data on prices available from the central bank suggests that Tobago recorded headline and food price inflation in March 2022 of 3.9% and 6.3% respectively. Core inflation, which excludes food and energy, was recorded at 3.5%. Given trends in the national and international markets, the forecast is for continued rising inflation in fiscal 2023. Madam Presiding Officer, this signals the need to boost our defense against inflation and protect the population from the falling real standard of living it invariably brings. Now turning my attention to the operations of the THA. Madam Presiding Officer, I wish to highlight the fact that central government transfers to the Assembly have typically been significantly below the amounts requested. On average, on an annual basis, the THA requested 4.8 billion, but received 2.3 billion for the fiscal years 2017 to 2022, which is approximately 47% of its overall budgetary request. Significantly, the fall in recurrent expenditure for the period averaged 36%, while the shortfall in development expenditure was about 84%. Additionally, Madam Presiding Officer, a disproportionate share of the allocation was assigned to recurrent expenditure. Specifically, on average, 88% of the allocation was assigned to recurrent expenditure, with about 12%, on average about $272 million per year, being assigned to the development expenditure for the periods 2017 to 2022. $272 million amounts to an underinvestment in Tobago's development. It cannot finance the launch of serious development programs in Tobago. Urgent steps are needed to address this investment deficit starting in fiscal 2023. Moreover, Madam Presiding Officer, annual revenues collected in Tobago averaged $226.4 million for the period 2015 to 2020, roughly 10% of Tobago's actual allocation from the central government for that period, and 13% of the Tobago's GDP. Madam Presiding Officer, as I indicated to this House, the total liabilities of the Assembly as at December 2021 stood at $738.1 million. In addition to this, there were contingent liabilities in respect of the bond financing, which amounts to $215.8 million payable by 2027. This means that the total liability of the Assembly was in the vicinity of $954 million, which is about 57% of Tobago's estimated GDP for 2021. Overall, the data on liabilities point to the urgent need to grow Tobago's GDP and for an allocation to service these liabilities to avoid an emerging debt crisis. In general, the outlook for Tobago is one populated with challenges, and there are mounting calls for an intensification of the steps towards economic development, which my administration has started. In addition, Madam Presiding Officer, like the outlook for the international, regional, and national economies, the Tobago outlook also signals an urgent need for budget allocations in fiscal 2023 to begin the process of strengthening the diversification and development foundations of the Tobago economy and, by extension, the national economy. In other words, the Tobago economy, if done right, can save the national economy. Allow me to highlight a few of the policy actions taken by this administration since assuming office. Madam Presiding Officer, the data and findings unearthed from our international, regional, and domestic inquiries so far point to the need for the intensification of the basic needs approach my administration instituted since assuming control of the Assembly. Having witnessed and noted the devastating impact of COVID-19 and the attendant disruption of lives and livelihoods on assuming office, Madam Presiding Officer, my administration took the deliberate policy decision to provide for the basic needs of Tobagonians with severe fiscal constraints inherited from our predecessors. Policy decisions were taken in the following areas: health, housing, food, education, debt management, and support for businesses.
The University of the West Indies has the capacity to generate its own funding, or at least part funding. Is that what I'm getting from you?
Yes, Stephen, thank you very kindly. You have put it in a precise language. If they have been doing that, it is to a minuscule extent.
Somebody tried to ask me, so what do you want? I said, brother, let me do good. Sometimes, even as a person, you ain't sure what you want, but you're absolutely sure what you don't want. And workers are absolutely certain that this 2% that is on offer is an insult.
2% over an 8-year period and tell your boy about cool it, things are hard. No. Are we living in a different Trinidad and Tobago? And that is what we have to discuss.
Discussion on health, leadership, governance, crime, education, and social justice. Every Wednesday, 8 to 9 p.m., the Citizens Community Forum. Your host, Stephen Cummings. And welcome back to the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, and this evening, at this time, we are talking the business of Tobago, more specifically focus on Tobago Budget Day 2022. We did hear the Chief Secretary, Farley Augustine, make mention of the fiscal package when he talked about a green budget. However you make of that, whatever you make of that, he is talking about a green budget with some novel ideas, and of course I'm sure that a lot of Tobagonians as well as persons in Trinidad will be looking on. We also have on the program at this time Mr. Joel Jack. Mr. Jack, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Sir Cummings. Thank you for having me on the program this evening.
Right. And just to continue our discussion, when we went to the break, we were talking about a number of issues, and I did ask you what were some of those major issues that main thing that should be the focus now when you talked about unemployment and so. But surely when we think of Tobago, Mr. Jack, we can't not think about the tourism sector and what are we doing to help boost that sector even more. I did see on the coming in of office of the current administration a move towards increasing flight and I suppose that would have impacted on hotel stock. What is do we still have an issue with in terms of getting persons? I know that there was a marketing plan that was in place under the former administration, and there were some things that we were told that were happening at the time. What is your view now, or what have you been sensing in terms of treating with this business of tourism in Trinidad and Tobago in a real way?
But if we take a step back and just review pre-pandemic Tobago in the first quarter of January 2021, January 2020, sorry, we were excited about the prospects for economic recovery, and of course, looking at a very buoyant tourism season. We anticipated increased arrivals. We were rolling out the third year or so of our tourism plan, and we were seeing increased numbers. The first quarter was promising, but then came COVID. So we were anticipating a return to economic growth. We were anticipating the revival of the tourism sector, because we had done the study, we had put together a robust plan. We had created the Tobago Tourism Authority, and they were hitting the road, targeting key segments of the tourism sector. But then came COVID, and as we begin to relax all the COVID measures, I think it's important that we cement some of and ensure some of those agreements.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
That we have those contractual agreements in place, and that we have continuation of airlift from Virgin, from some of our new niche markets to ensure that we start targeting them for the winter season. So the challenge for us is that we had to work with the airlines either by guaranteeing seats or partnering them for marketing plans so that to ensure that we had predictable airlift coming to Tobago.
Okay.
So that is important, and there is need for continuity in that regard to ensure that we have a successful winter season coming up in 2022 and into 2023.
All right. So again, you know, those are some of the important areas that you would want. You'd hope that there be heavy focus on.
We also ensure that we gave adequate support to young people who wanted to get through our business development unit, the enterprise assistance loan and grant programs. And a number of young entrepreneurs indicated to us when we started the enterprise assistance fund, they said, listen, we will not qualify for the loan program, so we needed a grant program. So that enterprise assistance grant program, that policy document that I had the pleasure of crafting was the primary focus was young persons, and it came out of it, emanated out of a consultation with young people.
Okay.
We talk about the support for young people and IT and training again, and young people and agriculture. The Executive Council took the decision to allocate and to earmark parcels of land to young graduates coming out of the YAPA program.
Yes, because I know that land tenure has always been an issue, Mr. Jack, especially in Tobago. There's been a big, a big debate about that, and the debate continues.
Yes, so in terms of the assembly, we have we are probably the largest land owners on the land. We have a sizable land bank, and we took the decision then to allocate some of those arable lands for young people to start their farming operations. And we anticipate that this is another area that I believe we would hear about in the budget again, a continuation of the policies of the People's National Movement.
You're confident that you would hear that particular area being being expanded or maybe maintained, going forward. You're confident, Mr. Jack?
I believe we would hear some more about it. But again, the emphasis has been about young people, because while we have been treating with the issues of providing enabling environment for all citizens, all Tobagonians, and all citizens resident on the island to succeed. We understood that there was a need to play particular emphasis on young people, on our young adults, because they face the challenge, one, of having difficulty of finding employment coming out of school, right after high school or right after university. I don't know if you recall those days when that experience, quote unquote, experience dilemma was the greatest challenge to finding employment.
Yes, and not to expose my age too much, but yes, I would have recalled some of those days, Mr. Jack, certainly.
And we implemented a number of programs, the Youth Energized for Success programs, and throughout internship and training program was the avenue to assist young persons to obtain the necessary experience over time, so that they can, and through training, prepare them to enter the workforce much faster. We worked with a number of institutions, both in Tobago and Trinidad, to provide internships for them. And our graduates even come to Trinidad to intern at the Central Bank and other institutions, both in the public and the private sector, both in Trinidad and Tobago. So emphasis has been on preparing young people for the future.
As part of the investment in the human capital. And we just want to remind our listeners and our viewers that this is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, and we are talking, our topic at this time, focus on Tobago, Budget Day 2022. And I'm talking with Mr. Joel Jack, a former THA Assemblyman and former Deputy Chief Secretary and Secretary of Finance and the Economy at the THA. Mr. Jack, this week is going to be a very significant week for a lot of us, as I said, not just in Tobago, but here in Trinidad. There is that link, with central government when we talk finance and monies and so. And one of the issues has always been whether I suppose it even happened during the time of the PNM administration. There's that concern about whether there's going to be that smooth kind of transition and that flow of funding from central government. Are you concerned that with this new administration that we may have problems between central government and the THA?
No, not at all, Stephen. I don't anticipate it. I'm leading from in front the Prime Minister.
Because Mr. Jack, the politics sometimes can color things in a certain way.
Well, politics aside, the People's National Movement in Tobago, if you recall one of Mr. London's famous statement, Tobago first, politics after. And I think that sort of magnanimity has also been shown by the Prime Minister, and he has led from the front, leading both himself and the Attorney General and other members of the cabinet. They have traveled to Tobago to meet with the new administration to ensure that there is a smooth transition, minimal interruption, and to have a cordial working relationship. Because it's all about maturity.
Yes.
It's all about us working collaboratively in the interests of Tobago and Trinidad and Tobago. Tobago has a meaningful contribution to make the national
economy. Yes.
Diversification, and we have to work together. And from our end, on the PNM side, the Prime Minister has demonstrated that. So the magnanimity and the maturity now must be shown from the Tobago House of Assembly side, that they are willing to work. Because during my tenure as Secretary of Finance, if you look throughout my budget statements over the last 8 or 9 years or so,
yes,
I didn't come to Trinidad to fight. I came to Trinidad, and it was PNM in Tobago and PNM in Trinidad. And I came to articulate a position for increased funding,
not to be adversarial. Yeah, not to be adversarial. Yes.
Right. And that is the approach that we need, because I can tell you that this might be the strategy that we will see coming forth again, the revival of that animosity between an adversarial policy between Trinidad and Tobago.
And because that's what I reference. That's what I reference. Whether
yes,
there should be real cause for concern, because when you talk about two different administrations, Mr. Jack, you have two different ideologies, two different perspectives, two different ways.
But so Cummings, don't think that we never had conflict when it was when I traveled to Trinidad, myself and the Chief Secretary to negotiate for Tobago, because our thinking and the ethos was Tobago first. Tobago first, party after, and we argued and articulated our position to advance the island's development, and that is evident by the number of projects, additional funding, and the approach that we took working with the central government. And persons can recall, we took that approach when I got into office in 2013, when there was a UNC administration in office. And my stance and my approach has been consistent from 2013 to then, working with the central government, and this is something that I would love to see happen. Additionally, what I was hoping that would have been that we'd have seen the magnanimity of the PDP in support of the bill granting Tobago
autonomy,
autonomy, which would have resulted in us
Yes.
receiving a decrease in a minimum allocation
Right.
of the budget.
And it is something that I wanted to raise with you,
Yes.
before we end the program. But go ahead. We'll allow you to develop that point.
And plus other revenue sharing mechanisms of all the oil and gas resources within Tobago's waters. So I am waiting with bated breath to see what the policies and what is the policy position and the policy stance of this new administration moving forward as it relates to funding for Tobago's development. Because I was chided in the past for bringing budget requests of close to $5 billion. And I was told to come down from there. But I am waiting with patient excitement to see what the numbers will be.
I know you were going there, Mr. Jack. And obviously, as I said, we will always have this issue about, whether Tobago is getting enough. And then even in the time of the PNM administration, there was also the argument, some people on the ground were saying, well, why is it we are only getting $2 billion, and out of, I think the last time I saw, Tobago only got about 3.7% of the national
No.
Was
that's not accurate. No, that's not accurate.
Yeah.
Because let me tell you, when I came in 2013, we received the barest minimum, 4.03% of the national budget. From 2015, when Mr. Imbud came into office, we started to receive upwards, over that 4.4%, 4.5%, and we received his support, formal support for the Assembly to raise additional funding similar to other state agencies so that we had his support to approach the bond market and to raise, in the first instance, $300 million.
Yes.
And additionally, we received his support to advance our public-private partnership modality.
Yeah.
And what that would have done is given us not just the budgetary allocation, but given us the budgetary allocation plus the financial flexibility to advance the island's development. And when we undertook the review of the CEDP 2.2 and the first iteration, one of the major constraints that we faced, it was the funding to accelerate the pace of the island's development.
Yes.
And the Minister of Finance demonstrated time and time again his support for Tobago and for us having the financial flexibility and additional resources outside of the budgetary allocation to advance Tobago's development.
All right. So you're saying that it's not a case that Tobago was choked, if I were to use that term, for financing central government.
Not at all. And let me say, at midterm, when you look at the midterm resources that we received in 2020 and during the pandemic, during the crisis, we met with the Minister of Finance, and he readily agreed to ensure that Tobago had adequate and additional financial support during the pandemic. Okay. And so that's why when we took our review and we put together our plans for the fiscal period, there was always a caveat in that Executive Council minute that at midterms, in the month of April, we will review, and then we will meet with the Minister of Finance.
Yes, and if there's need for additional funding that can be had. We just want to remind our listeners that this is the Citizens Community Forum. Stephen Cummings, and our topic focus on Tobago Budget Day 2022. I'm talking with Mr. Joel Jack, a former THA Assemblyman and former Deputy Chief Secretary and the Secretary of Finance and the Economy at the THA. Mr. Jack, we have just a few minutes again before we close the program. I want to take the opportunity at this time to give you, to allow you to have, because we have to end the program, just to have some closing remarks. Where do you see, Tobago positioned now, and where would you like it to be, having regard to all the things that you've said during your time and the foundation and those pillars that you referenced? Certainly, a lot of people are going to be watching. They're going to be looking. They're going to be doing the comparatives as well as to what obtained some years ago, as to what the numbers would be come Thursday. Your closing remarks this time, Mr. Jack.
I've made the statement, Sir Cummings, that Tobago is at a strategic inflection point. And what we do today will determine the direction the island will take, and whether we advance the island's development. As a Tobagonian, I am concerned. I am concerned when someone makes a boastful claim that they are ready to fix everything on the island, and without a plan, without any formal policy document guiding the process. I am concerned, and equally all Tobagonians should be concerned. And I want to encourage all Tobagonians, I have done even during my time, to be alert, be on guard, listen, because your life and your future and the future of your children and the future of your children's children will depend on some of the policies that will be implemented in the next 4 years. And I am concerned because I'm overly concerned because I've seen some signs over the past 4 years when I saw the approach to the budget response, both by the PDP leader and now current chief secretary. And I am hoping that there is a departure from what I saw over the past 4 years. Because as I stated before, it's Tobago first, Trinidad and Tobago first, and party after. And Tobago has a meaningful contribution to make, and I would want to see Tobago advance so that my children and my great-grandchildren, that your children and your great-grandchildren in Trinidad and Tobago can have a better life, and that we can make the global impact that I know we can make as an island and as a country.
All right, Mr. Jacko, we have to leave it there at the moment, and we want to thank you again for taking the time to sit with us on the Citizens Committee Forum. I'm hoping that we don't have to wait for too long again when we have the opportunity to invite you back. As I said, our last interfacing was way back in 2020. Nonetheless, we are all looking towards what those numbers would be, and of course, if needs be, we would also take the opportunity to invite you back very soon, so that we.
I'm a phone call away, Sir Stephen, and you are the first media house who have had the opportunity to interview me. So. And that is hats off to 98.1. Thank you for having me on the program.
And thank you, Mr. Jack. And we are talking, we were talking, the business of Tobago, a focus on Tobago Budget Day 2022. And that was Mr. Joel Jack, a former THA Assemblyman and former Deputy Chief Secretary and Secretary of Finance and the Economy at the Tobago House of Assembly. And that's our program for this evening. We invite you to join us again for another edition of the Citizens Community Forum next Wednesday. I'm Stephen Cummings. It was a famous poet who once said, "They came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." Words there from famous poet Martin Niemöller, 1892 to 1984.